westward expansion and manifest destiny. The American colonies and new nation grew rapidly in population and area as pioneers rushed to the western settlement frontier. This process finally ended between 1890 and 1910, when the last major farmland and ranchland was settled. Native American tribes in some places resisted with force, but they were overwhelmed by settlers and the military, and after 1830 were removed to reservations in the West. The influential frontier theory argued that the frontier created the nation's character and its boldness, violence, initiative, individualism, and democracy. Historians today have emphasized the multicultural nature of the American frontier. Widespread and extensive media attention focused on the Wild West of the latter half of the 19th century. As Hine and Farragher define it, frontier history tells the story of the creation and defense of communities, the use of land, the development of markets, and the establishment of states. They explain, this is a story of conquest, but also a story of survival, resilience, and the integration of the peoples and cultures that emerged and continued to live in America through war and treaty, establishing law and order, building farms and towns, building trails and mining, and attracting countless foreign immigrants. The United States expanded from coast to coast to fulfill the dream of manifest destiny. As the American frontier became history, the myths of the West in novels and movies took a firm hold in the imagination of Americans and foreigners alike. America in particular chose an iconic image for itself. No other nation, as David Murdoch has said, has taken a time and place from its past to create a structure for the imagination that matched the creation of the American West. From the early 1830s to 1869, the Oregon Trail and its many sub-trails were used by over 300,000 settlers. Farmers, ranchers, and private business owners and their families headed for California, Oregon, and other points in the far west. The wagon train journey took 5 to 6 months. After 1869, the trip took only 6 days by rail. Its destiny was the belief that American settlers were destined to expand across the North American continent. The concept was born of a sense of duty to redeem the old world by a culminating model, created by the potential of a new land to build a new paradise. The phrase itself had different meanings for different groups, but was rejected by the advocates of modernization. The advocates of modernization wanted to build cities and factories, not more farms. Daniel Walker Howe argues, American imperialism did not represent a consensus of the American people. It created bitter dissension within the national community. In fact, the Democratic Party favored territorial expansion, while the majority of Whigs opposed it. Nevertheless, Manifest Destiny provided the rhetoric for the purchase or acquisition of the largest territory the United States had ever possessed. After bitter debate in Congress, the Republic of Texas was annexed by the United States in 1845, despite Mexico's warning that it would mean war. War broke out in 1846, with the home front divided between the Whigs opposing the war and the Democrats supporting it. The U.S. Army, using regulars and a large volunteer force, easily won the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 48. Public sentiment in the United States was divided, with Whigs and anti-slavery elements opposing the war. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo ceded California, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and surrounding areas to the United States, while the people living in these areas were granted full U.S. citizenship. Soon after gold was discovered in Northern California, over 100,000 people flocked there within a few months. This event is known as the California Gold Rush. South Divide. The central issue after 1848 was the expansion of slavery. This pitted the anti-slavery majority in the North against the pro-slavery majority in the South. A small number of very active Northerners were abolitionists, declaring that owning slaves was a sin, in Protestant theology and demanding the immediate abolition of slavery. The much larger number opposed to the expansion of slavery sought to time its disappearance so that America could become a land of liberty, free labor without slaves, and free speech, as opposed to the strict censorship in the South. Southern whites insisted that slavery was a cultural and socio-economic benefit to all whites and even to the slaves themselves, and denounced all anti-slavery speakers as abolitionists. Religious activists were also divided on slavery, with Methodists and Baptists splitting into northern and southern denominations. In the North, Methodists, Congregationalists, and Quakers had large abolitionist followings, especially among women activists. Catholics, Episcopalians, and Lutherans largely ignored the issue of slavery. The issue of slavery in the new territories was largely resolved by the Compromise of 1850, negotiated by Whig Henry Clay and Democrat Stephen A. Douglas. The compromise included the admission of California as a free state. The sticking point was the removal of the anti-slavery law. The Fugitive Slave Act made it easier for slave owners to reclaim their runaway slaves. Abolitionists seized on this act to attack slavery, as in Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. The Compromise of 1820 was repealed in 1854 by the Kansas-Nebraska Act, sponsored by Senator Douglas in the name of popular sovereignty and democracy. This act allowed settlers to decide on slavery in each territory and allowed Douglas to say he was neutral on the issue of slavery. Anti-slavery forces grew angry and alarmed. They formed a new Republican Party. Pro- and anti-slavery forces flocked to Kansas to vote on whether to abolish or retain slavery, leading to a minor civil war known as Bleeding Kansas. By the late 1850s, the fledgling Republican Party dominated all states. Northern states, and thus dominated the Electoral College, insisting that slavery would never be allowed to expand and thus gradually disappear. Southern slave societies grew rich from their cotton and other consumer goods. Some profited from the domestic slave trade. They had banking, shipping, and manufacturing connections with northern cities like Boston and New York City. By 1860, there were 4 million slaves in the South, nearly 8 times the total number of slaves in the country in 1790. Plantations were profitable thanks to the strong European demand for raw cotton. Much of the profit was invested in new land and new slaves purchased from the declining tobacco-growing regions. For 50 of the first 72 years of the United States, the presidency of the United States was held by a slave owner. During this period, only presidents with new slaveholding states were re-elected to second terms. In addition, southern states benefited from their increased apportionment in Congress due to the partial counting of slaves in their populations. Of attempted and actual slave rebellions failed, including Gabriel Prosser, 1800, Denmark Vesey, 1822, Nat Turner, 1831, and John Brown, 1859. These rebellions led to southern states establishing stricter controls on slavery and reducing the rights of free blacks. The Supreme Court's 1857 decision in Dred Scott v. Sanford, which accepted the southern position that slavery was legal anywhere in the country, angered Northerners. After Abraham Lincoln won the presidential election of 1860, 7 southern states seceded from the Union between late 1860 and 1861, forming a new government, the Confederate States of America, on February 8, 1861. When Lincoln ordered troops to suppress the Confederacy in April 1861, 4 more states seceded and joined the Confederacy. Along with the northwestern portion of Virginia, which later became West Virginia, 4 of the 5 northernmost slavery was legalized, states did not secede and became border states.